It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be glad to participate. I love the picture behind your head.
Oh, cool. I will. I made stickers of that. I'm gonna send you one in the mail. I'll get your address after we're all done.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
So, but yeah, man, it's great to meet you. And I've been having such a good. My background's probably weird here, but I've having such a good time with your book. And I think the thing about it, obviously the character development is so well done, but it's so gripping because it's so real with the way the pharmaceuticals run this country and how something can just go off the rails.
Yes. Well, they certainly do. Yes, that was what I was trying to get at. Yes, I'm glad it came through.
How real do you think something like this could potentially become
I
down
think
the
it could
line?
be very real. I mean, I think we all know about big pharma's kind of well, I don't want to say criminal, but close to it, promotion, advertising, uh, um, uh, efforts to sell drugs for diseases that don't exist, exaggerating the benefits, co-opting doctors. We see it all the time in the papers, and so I probably stepped it up a bit by having them add uh, an additional drug element. But now, when I read in the paper, since I wrote the book, it's more and more real. I think it could happen very easily. I like to used to think that the Food and Drug Administration would never let that get by, and but I'm and I'm sure their intentions are not never to get them by that, but we all know that these things can happen in a big bureaucracy. So yeah, it could happen.
So how did this come about? How did Mark Zorn become born? I mean, you talk like you've lived in the precinct. You're very intimately woven into the narrative of what's going on here. It just feels like a movie. How did this happen?
Well, of course, this is the third Marco Zorn book I've written.
Yeah.
They all take place in Washington, D.C., which is where I've lived for the last umpteen years. So I know the city very well, and I thought would be a character the novel. So first, I in writing these novels and conceiving of the stories, I usually start from some major event that's going on, political or non-political. The first one had to do with white nationalists, militias. The second one, an international plot by the Russians to kill Marco Zorn for complicated reasons. And this time, I got absolutely engaged in reading a number of books about big pharma and what they're doing and not doing, particularly in the opioid epidemic. And of course, since then, there's been a lot in the way of movies, uh, TV shows. It's my narrative. It seems almost modest compared to some of the other things you now see on cable. But yes, I was completely engaged in big pharma issue and outraged. I just was really disgusted at what I was reading in the various books I read. This is about 2 or 3 years ago, and I just thought I needed to put this down on paper, and fiction sounded the right way to do it. I wasn't going to write another nonfiction book because there are already plenty out there now that explore this. But I thought I could dramatize it in a way that would make it real to readers by putting it in a fictionalized form, which is what I've done or tried to do in any case.
Living in a place like DC, there's so much going on, and you have such a bead on the pulse of, the political scene and law enforcement. How frightening and how strange are times now. I mean, I remember in my history, there would be tension that would happen in politics. But right now, as we enter an election year, we're entering some pretty uncharted territory.
Yes, we are completely. I would not know how to address that. If I was writing a novel now, which I am, but not about that, and I wanted to deal with the politics, I would be lost because it's for one thing, it's changing from day to day, and it's getting more less and less believable. So I think people would say, "Oh no, that would never happen."
Yeah,
So
right.
I, no, you're quite right. Uh, yes, it's. But I love Washington. This is my hometown, and there's so many aspects of it that I try to capture at least a bit of in the book and all the books because it's one of the main characters. My first book was called The Reflecting Pool, and in a sense, but the books are a reflection of Washington. That's why I that's sort of one of the concept behind the books.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that these books are thrillers. It's heart pounding. There's serious stuff going on, but I want to ask you a little bit more of a lighthearted thing. What do you
Sure.
like the best about living in Washington, D.C.? What is it that's the best part of it?
Well, that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. There's so much. First place, of course, I was in the work for the government for 20 years with foreign service. Part of half of that time, I was living abroad and working in embassies abroad. But I love the politics of the city, the background noise. I used to like it more than I do now. Less charming, less fun if I may say so. But this is an exciting city to live in, but it has so many aspects of it. As I try to capture at least a bit, there's the city of the government, of the big institutions, the museums, the things that the tourists see, and which I saw and enjoyed. But there's a whole different city there. There's a city that is oppressed, poor, often drug ridden, crime ridden. I got exposed to that when I went to law school and worked with a defense attorney and had met with witnesses in crime trials. And I saw a lot part of Washington that don't live in. And then I found that I got more exposed to this other part of Washington, which was can be quite dangerous. Not to me personally, I was never at any risk, but it's a there's so many aspects of the city. It's a cultural city, maybe not comparable to New York or Chicago, but still a vibrant cultural city. Well, was before COVID. Is a little bit less so now, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but
And
there's a good music scene,
yeah.
jazz scene. So there's so much going on here. It's never a dull moment in
Yeah.
Washington.
I imagine so. So at the end of the day, your backbone is a master storyteller. How did these seeds get into you? Where were you born and raised? And how did you get this fascination with story and get the ability to present it so well to people?
Well, I've lived well. I've always been interested in writing. Writing is a passion for me ever since I was in high school. I didn't publish anything, but I wrote a lot. Then I went to law school, and then I was in the foreign service for 20 some years, where I was kind of busy. Didn't have a lot of free time to write, but I always had it in the back of my mind. I want to write fiction. What When I got retired from the foreign service, I wrote plays. I wrote a number of plays, many of which have been produced here in Washington and New York and abroad. Uh, and I really enjoyed that for a variety of reasons. But then I wanted to try to stretch myself and do something that was a novel in a purely narrative form. So I decided on the thriller genre. I could have done mystery, or I could have done young adult. Probably wasn't in my in my basket for of choices. But I love the writing. So then I just, as I said before, I pick up on what I see around me nationally and in Washington about what's happening, what is attracting people's attention in the paper, on news, online, and I spin that out. And narrative for me, narrative fiction, it is a very exciting genre because you can do all kinds of things. You can with nonfiction, at least in theory, you're supposed to stick to the facts as best you can. I don't have to do that when I'm writing a novel, but I want to base it on fact. There's a fundamental element of truth in everything I write, but I then spin it off, make it more dramatic, more interesting, more relevant, maybe. And that's sort of what my approach to writing has always been. Whatever format when I first started, I did science fiction and a little bit of fantasy. Stopped that many years ago, and may never probably never go back to it. But that's my my passion. A day that I don't write, I feel is a day lost, even if nothing comes of the writing, which it sometimes often doesn't.
Yeah. So what was the first book that you ever read that really opened the doors up for you, that you loved and made you want to write or read more?
Oh, I don't know. Probably um, Tolkien. Probably.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Yes. Probably Tolkien's books. The Hobbit probably was the very first book. Well, not the first book I read, because the first book I read of all things was Plutarch's Lives, the history of the Roman and Greek emperors. Odd beginning for somebody, but that probably did influence me in a way I can't describe. But when I started to read just for fun, it was The Hobbit, and then from The Hobbit from then on, in that kind of genre.
So who's been kind of a hero for you in your life?
Sorry, excuse me. Well,
Who's been a hero for you in your life? A
I'm
hero, so
sorry.
like a role model, an inspiration?
Oh,
Who's been,
a hero for me. Oh, well, there's so many. I don't want I don't want to insult anybody by leaving them out. In real life, oh, there. I think because I have a long life because I've been around for a while, but uh, FDR, Kennedy, more recently Barack Obama, but these are on the political side. On on the artist side, I think John Le Carre more in more recent years. Uh, I'm not sure how I would have gotten along with him. I'm not sure I would have believed anything he said, but I think I would have had a wonderful time listening to him.
yeah. Yeah. So, the one thing about your book is that it almost seems as though fiction influences reality. Have you ever heard from anybody in the department or in politics that say, "Man, that book was spot on. What you were writing about was totally the way it is." What feedback have you gotten from people on
Well,
that?
I've got some feedback along those lines, nothing quite as categorical as you describe it. Usually people say it's just right, it sounds right, I feel it feels correct. Occasionally I get the person who says, I don't believe that. There are people who really find it politically objectionable that a police officer would not carry a gun. Uh,
Right.
and that's yeah, I can understand why people can react that way, but mostly it's just generally speaking they like the story, they were engaged in the story. I haven't heard anybody from my diplomatic years comment on the scenes in the embassies or in the State Department, which in the previous novel, a number of them do because it takes place, involves an international assassin, and it was engaged, involved in a number of local Washington, D.C. embassies and the State Department. The I have a real embassy mention, although I keep waiting for them to write to me and say that's not our embassy. We didn't kill anybody. No, but they didn't read the book yet.
Yeah.
I
So,
must send them a copy.
yeah, absolutely. So, let me ask you this. As somebody that's lived a long life, you have a lot of wisdom. If you had a dream tonight and ran into the 20-year-old version of you, and you could give
Oh,
that young version of you a piece of advice, What would you tell that young version of you?
Uh, well, oddly enough, I tell them to do just what I've done, which is if you love writing, which I do, stick to it. Do writing, um, even if you're not, even if it's kind of a questionable career for most people. Most writers don't make much money out of it. Don't are not featured on TV programs as cultural heroes. But if that's what you love to do, that's what you should do. And I think I would just advise myself to do what I did do. I love the foreign service. I love the diplomatic work. And when I was finished with that, I went to my next love. So I don't think I would have changed anything.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show.
Yes.
What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I've never been asked that question. That's kind of a scary question,
It could be therapeutic.
Yes. I've never, well, actually, in a strange way, I think of myself a little bit like the main character in my books, Marco Zorn.
Yeah.
Uh, not quite as flamboyant, and certainly not as high risk as he is. And I'm not a policeman and never been involved in law enforcement directly. But his style and his attitude towards authority and towards the world is very much my own. And his humor, such as it is very much my own.
So Fire Trap is the brand new book. Wonderful read. Where can people pick up this book and any other books? Learn more about you. Where can they go?
Go to your favorite bookstore, or if you must, Amazon. They'll be happy to sell you a copy.
Wonderful. This has
Thank you
been
very
great,
much.
man. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your creativity and insight, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yes,
Appreciate it very much.
thank you.